We built this house a few years ago, and we chose black garage doors because we like the way they look and how they match the trim of the house. But we knew they would get full sun, at least for part of the day, and that we would definitely need to insulate them at some point in the future down the road. Well, today, that time has come. Like all of my DIY projects, I started this by watching a lot of YouTube videos to see if others had gone before me and worked out all the details and showed me exactly what I needed to do. YouTube's really great for that. I needed to put vinyl siding on a shed in the past, and I found a terrific video for how to do that. I needed to rebuild the carburetor on my Mustang, and I found a great tutorial with the exact model carburetor I have, showing me how to rebuild it step by step. However, for insulating a garage door, there's a slew of videos on YouTube, but I couldn't find one that comprehensively showed me everything that I want to do. There was lots of great content in each one, some that were not so great, but the beauty of YouTube is you could go to the comments and see if what the person in the video was telling you was actually true by the collective input of the YouTube community. So my goal in this video is to take the knowledge I've learned from watching those videos, doing research online, and try to put that together in one comprehensive video that could be a one-stop shop for you if you choose to insulate your garage door in the same manner that I did. I by no means am a home insulation expert. I'm just taking what I learned from the videos and what makes sense to me and trying to apply it all in one comprehensive video. I fully expect you to find things in the video and point out in the comments that I did that you disagree with or that I did that you think I could have done better, and I certainly welcome that. So let's get started. There's two types of heat transfer that you need to be concerned with when insulating a garage door. You'll hear people talk a lot about a radiant barrier or trying to block radiant heat, and that works really well as long as you have the proper air gap. There's also another type of heat transfer, which is conductive heat transfer. It's 2:40, 2:50 in the afternoon now. We're getting some direct sunlight on the door. Again, the doors are black, so they're absorbing a lot of that heat. And if I check the temperature now, it's 121 degrees on the door. I know people get a lot of flack for using these in videos. My doors aren't reflective, so it should be a fairly accurate reading. If I hold my hand near it, or I actually can feel it off the side of my face, I feel the radiant heat transfer passing through the air. If I touch it, I feel the heat much more strongly as that conductive heat transfers directly into me. So when you're putting in your insulation, you want to make sure that you have an air gap so that it works effectively as a radiant heat barrier and isn't touching the door and then allowing that conductive heat transfer. I don't have much space to work with here, but the bigger of an air gap you can give yourself, the better. From my research online, it looks like there's drastic improvements up to 1 inch, and then after 1 inch, the improvements start to trail off. I've got 1.5 inches to work with on my door, so I'm gonna try to pull the foam boards that I'm using as close to the front of the door as possible. The way I'm gonna do that is by putting a 1-inch foam spacer. I got two different kinds of foam that I'm working with. I'm working with polyiso, which is backed with a foil liner, and it's that foil liner that's gonna reflect the radiant heat back toward the door, but only if that air gap's there. I didn't want the foil touching the door, again, because then I would get the conductive heat transfer. So I bought the pink foam. I'm not sure the chemical makeup of that, but I bought the pink foam, which is 1 inch. And so I'll be gluing that to the door directly to provide my spacer, and then installing the polyiso with the reflective part facing toward the door. Another key thing, both sides are lined with foil, but only one side has the reflective side facing out. The manufacturer claims that both do roughly the same thing. But since I'm trying to keep heat out, again, in North Carolina, I'm worried more about the hot summers than I am the cold winters and trying to keep the heat in. I'm gonna put the foil side facing out. So as that radiant heat transfer tries to go through my foam insulation, that foil backing will reflect it back to the door. And the 1 inch gap, the reason I went with the pink foam is because it's not lined with any foil, and hopefully it'll work as a better insulator for that conductive heat transfer since it's not lined with foil on either side, which would probably make it a better conductor of heat. The air gap is more effective if the air is stagnant, meaning I'm gonna come back with foil tape and tape this off as airtight as I can get it, because if the air can flow back and forth, well, then that heat can transfer out and seep into the garage. So I'm gonna wanna make sure, as best as I can roughly get it, that I'm taping up these holes and taping up the seams of the foam board so that I prevent that air from moving and that air can stay in as the insulator and allow that radiant heat barrier to reflect the heat back to the garage door. The plan here is to take my construction adhesive, put it on the back of my XPS pink insulation, which will be my spacer to create the air gap. And so I'll attach these directly to the wall. I'm not too worried about the fact that I'm gluing them on because I really hope I never have to take this off, but if I do, I'll have some foam and adhesive to scrape off. But I'm gonna adhere these directly to the garage door as spacers. Because these are 1 inch thick, that will leave roughly ½ an inch for my polyiso foil backed board to tuck down in, and then I'll come back along with the tape and tape those in and seal it up nice and tight. Step 1 is going to be cleaning the doors off very good. As you can see, they're covered in dust, there's bugs caught down in the bottom of the track, and we're going to be completely sealing off each one of these panels with the foam board insulation and taping it in place. And so we don't want that trapped in there. And also we're going to be using adhesive and tape. And so we don't want the dust because we want it to stick well. So we'll wipe everything down, get it all clean, let it dry before we get started. In order to be able to access the panels a little better and clean, I'm going to go ahead and remove the wind braces. But before I do, I'm going to label each one just in case there's slight differences in where the holes are drilled and how they're matched so I can put them back on exactly how they were whenever I took them off. We interrupt your regularly scheduled programming to bring you Lessons Learned with JJ. I was trying to be efficient here, and I thought that it would be more efficient to remove all the horizontal braces so I'd have full access to the door and be able to work on it easier. But what I didn't think about was each of those cross horizontal beams is pretty significant in weight, and when you add up 7 of them, that's a lot of weight. So I went to open the door to be able to pass the glass cleaner back and forth underneath the door, and because of the tension of the spring, the door immediately rolled all the way up, and now I can't get it back down. We're gonna use my truck and ratchet strap the bottom of the door and pull the door back down shut so that we can put a couple of these horizontal braces back on to add some additional weight to it, and then we'll take them off one at a time as we need instead of taking them all off up front. Again, this is the beauty of YouTube. Learn from my mistakes. If you live in an area that has horizontal brace requirements on your garage doors because of wind, don't take them all off at the same time. Take them off section at a time, and it will save you a lot of headache in the end. You probably noticed already earlier in the video from the glare that we have windows at the top of the garage, and I don't want to cover those up with insulation because, again, I like the way they look and I want to be able to see in and see out. So instead, we're going to be covering them with heat control window film. This claims to block 72% of the sun's heat and 99% of UV rays. And then the idea will be to insulate around them with foam, cutting it out to look nice. Putting window tint on can be a real pain, especially if you're a bit of a perfectionist like myself. If I was to hire out one part of this project, this would definitely be it. But before you install window tint, the key to getting good quality here is to make sure that the window is really clean. So we're cleaning it inside and out with glass cleaner to remove all dust, debris, or anything that's on the window. And the main reason we're cleaning the outside is, one, it will just help it look nicer, but two, also that we can see any debris that's left on the inside. We'll know if it's on the inside or outside. It'll make it a little easier for the install. Additionally, you can come back behind with a razor blade and scrape the surface of the window to remove anything that the glass cleaner was unable to remove. And then after you've done that thoroughly all over the whole window, come back with glass cleaner one more time to get everything off. The window tint can be cut to size, and you'll want to cut it just a little bit larger than your window because you'll be coming back and trimming it down with a razor blade after the install. And having a good flat surface to lay it on so that it doesn't get wrinkled or kinked during the process is really key as well. Once you have your window tint cut to size, you can then apply this solution to the window before you actually stick the window tint in place. And the purpose of this is to make it so that the window tint can move around on the window so you're not committing to anything right away. You can get this solution at your hardware store, or you can just use soapy water as well. Next, you'll peel the backing off of the tint and then apply it to the window. And you can see with this first piece, I was learning as I went, but I decided to start applying it on the left-hand side and then remove the backing as I worked my way over to the right. This turned out not to be the best approach for this, as you'll see later in the video.
Once all the backing is removed and the window film is completely on the window, you can now use a squeegee to push the solution out off the window to one of the edges. You want to make sure that you work from the center and work your way outward, removing all of the soap, all of the air bubbles, so that you're left with the window film sticking directly to the window. Next, you'll take a straight edge or a very sharp razor blade or knife and cut around the edge of the window to cut off the excess window tint, making sure that you push the window tint all the way to the corner before you cut off any of the excess, so that once it's gone, it lays flush with the seam of the window. This one that came with the kit was nice because it was a good size to hold in your hand. It was rubberized and it only had a really small tip on the end that was a really extremely sharp edge for cutting off this excess. Unfortunately, just like I mentioned before, if the window film gets creased or kinked along the way, then it can leave a permanent mark in it. And once I see that, I cannot unsee it. So after finishing this section, it was just a good practice run and it ended up all coming off anyway. The best way I found to do this is by having someone else hold the window tint up by both corners so that you're not holding it with one hand in the middle and sending a crease down the middle. And then another person removed the backing all the way off the entire piece of window film. I didn't want to do this to begin with because I didn't want to expose the adhesive ahead of time where it might pick up dust or debris, but as quickly as we're transitioning over to the window, it's not really a concern, and it's just a better way to apply it directly to the window as one piece so that you don't end up with any creases or kinks along the way. And if you're curious what it looks like from the outside, this is after we had only done the 4 leftmost windows in this grouping here. You can see it's got an extra reflective coating and reflects light a little bit brighter, kind of a mirror finished as compared to the other sections. And now that the window tinting is behind us, we can move on to the feature presentation. Here I'm taking the pink XPS foam that I've cut into little strips and I'm applying it directly to the garage door using construction adhesive. Really focusing on the 4 outside edges of each of these panels to make sure that the polyiso is lifted off to really create that good air gap to provide a better radiant barrier. I decided to focus on one panel and go through the whole process from start to finish so that I could learn along the way instead of doing it in more of the assembly line method that you'll see that I do later on as I can finish the rest of the door. But here I'm now focusing on getting the polyiso slid into place now that I've got my pink XPS spacer boards already glued in place. This took a little practice. As I worked through each panel, I got a little better at it, and also just learning exactly how big to cut each of the sections to get it to fit in place, and how much you could bend these foam boards without them actually snapping. Once everything was slid and fit into place, I then measured out pieces of my foil tape to seal everything off as airtight as I was trying to get it for this project, to really try to keep that air pocket stagnant so that it provides a better radiant barrier. I find this worked best if I went ahead and pre-cut the strips, just roughly holding them up to the panel that I was trying to tape, and then applied each of the strips individually. I did use scissors, even though you can tear this by hand. It just provides a cleaner, sharper edge at the end and gives it a better look.
When I do some of these sections, I'll need to back out the screws from the hinges, obviously being careful to do this one at a time so that we don't separate the door from how it's holding it together. But the screws on the back side of that go into that section, and I'd have a better time getting my foam to lay flush against the front of the garage here if those screws are recessed back out, and then once I get the foam in place, I can put them back through directly into the foam. And just take note that certain garage door hardware, as it says on this warning label here, the red screws are under extreme tension, and so we want to make sure that we don't touch any of those. So I'll just do the best I can on that bottom section. But on these other sections, I'll plan on removing these screws so that I can get the foam boards back in there a little better.
For cutting the main sections of the insulation to go in each of these panels, I used a couple of sawhorses, a really long T-square, a Sharpie for drawing my lines, and a really sharp box cutter. It works really great and cuts through the foam with ease as long as you have a brand new blade. I did notice as I continued to work through the project that the blade got a little dull and it would cause the foil backing to wrinkle up. So if you're having that issue, swap out your blade for a new one and it should cut through it like butter. And now that one section is completed and we know how the process works from start to finish, I can work my way across in the assembly line fashion that I mentioned before and get this entire row knocked out.
So I'm just noticing that these end panels have these holes on the outside of them, which would let the hot air that's being trapped by the radiant barrier out. So we thought about possibly spray foaming them, but we would have to put tape on the outside to keep the spray foam from coming out anyway. So we're just going to use the foil tape and try to cover up the outside of those as best we can, knowing that when you get down to where the hinges are, or where the pieces of the door hinge together, there's going to be a gap there we just won't be able to cover, but just close it up as best we can. We've got the window tint on the windows to stop the heat from coming through, but I don't want to just not insulate the part of the garage around the window. So what we're going to try is put our pink SPS foam up against the window and glue that closely to the window. And then once we've basically framed the entire window with that, we'll cut the other pieces of the polyiso to go in the holes around it, and then tape over it with the foil tape to try to hide the pink foam so that you don't see the pink foam. The foil tape will just come down and tape directly onto the frame of the window without actually getting on the window itself. So we'll try that on one and see how it goes.
Once we got the pink foam framed around the window itself, we realized that it would actually make a lot of sense too to also use the pink foam to frame around the outer perimeter of each of these panels too. That way you have two sides for the polyiso to rest up against and make sure you hold it off the garage door itself and really focus on creating that really good air gap. We then glued the polyiso directly to the XPS foam and then proceeded to use the foil tape to tape everything in place. We found that it worked best on the inside seams around the window itself if you fold the foil tape after you've cut it to size, and then that makes it so that it just lays perfectly in place without sticking to anything or creasing where you don't want it to, and then you can just push it in place and get it to set really nicely. This is the closest I'll ever come to Colin Furr's level of metalworking in any of my videos.
So all in all, pretty happy with how that turned out. All the seams are closed off. You can't see the pink foam boards. Got a good airtight seal all the way around, and you won't be able to see it from the outside. It's not blocking or obstructing the window in any way. Well, we're gonna call it quits for today. It took a lot longer than anticipated to trim around the windows. That work's pretty tedious, but we got all the windows finished. In this garage, we got the first row finished, and so doing the next bottom two rows should go pretty quickly from here on out. It's been a couple of days since we put the first sections of insulation up, and I haven't been able to get back to the garage to finish the next sections, but I wanted to give an update just of the observations I've been able to see so far. It's currently a little after 4 p.m. in the afternoon, relatively sunny day outside, and it's 88 degrees outside. It's also currently 88 degrees in the garage, according to my temperature sensors. And if I check the temperature of the insulated panels, I'm reading anywhere between 89 to 92, 93 degrees. If I check the temperature of the uninsulated panels right below it, it's currently reading 142. So I'm getting a delta of 142 down to 90 degrees, so 52, 53 degrees difference in temperature from what the garage door is to what the outside of the insulated panels are. And given, that could even be because these two hotter sections are below it and heat rises, it could be heating up the outside of these, maybe even a little more. But so far, just with the top two sections, one of which is tinted windows, I'm able to see that the garage can maintain the same temperature inside as what it currently is outside, and that's fantastic compared to the much hotter temperatures we were seeing inside before any of it was insulated. So really looking forward to getting the next two sections insulated and seeing what kind of temperature deltas we can see after that.
And now on to the next row, and due to the magic of editing, it's time-lapse time.
Things that was mentioned in one of the videos that I watched was how you have to be careful with the foil tape because it is metal and you can cut yourself on the edges. And after finishing the entire door, it wasn't until the last little bit when I'm going back and smoothing out all the tape that I did get cut a couple of times. So you may want to consider that. I just glazed over it in the video that I saw, thinking, oh, I've used this tape before. It's not sharp. It's pretty bendable. It's not going to cut. But if you have a seam where an edge of a piece of tape is and you're rubbing your hand down, it works just like a paper cut, except it's metal, so it cuts a little worse. Something to keep in mind.
And now that the double bay is complete, you can get a look at what the finished project looks like. Complete with foil tape seams everywhere and mirror finished window tint. If you don't personally prefer the writing of the polyiso boards facing into your garage, you can flip those over and have the foil side facing in to get a completely silver door. I personally didn't care about that, and like I said earlier, I was focused on the foil side facing out to the environment to keep the hot North Carolina temperatures out and not in my garage.
Well, the double bay is done, and we're noticing a big difference during the heat of the day with the temperature staying down. But now it's time to do the single bay, affectionately known in our family as the Mustang bay for obvious reasons. But before we do the door, I wanted to address this window. I don't exactly have in mind what I'm going to do to fix this. Ideally, we have some blinds on the inside of the house that have air gaps inside of them that create kind of an insulation. They even make some with foil inside the air gaps. So I'm still doing some research on that. In the meantime, I just wanted to be able to block the sunlight coming through the window. So I got some of the paper blinds. They sell these at Home Depot and Lowe's. I happened to get these at Home Depot because they had a better deal on a 6-pack. So for a 6-pack of these, it's $23, so roughly $4 a piece. So you just cut them. I cut these with the same box cutter I'm using to cut the foil insulation. So you just measure them, cut them, stick them on. I'm going to use some tape too because I've used these before temporarily in the past, and the stickiness does fall off. They're just thin paper, so they're not meant for long term, but it's just to block some of the sun for now until we can decide what we're going to do out of here. So for 12 bucks, I can cover this window and have a temporary solution in place that will help until we decide what we're going to do. Well, I can already tell that made a decent difference in the amount of light coming into the room. Toward the end of the installation, I ended up turning the light on because it got a little dim in here. So time will tell how good it does at keeping the temperature down, but we at least know it's keeping a decent amount of the light out. And again, this is just a temporary solution until we can figure out something better to do. So for 12 bucks, the window's covered, and we're good to go from that perspective. They come with these plastic clothespins that you can use if you want to raise it up and clip it to itself. I ended up using them to actually pull it down, as you saw in the time lapse, from being compressed in the box. They didn't want to stretch all the way down to the bottom, so pulling them down and using those pins to clip them to the bottom of the windowsill will help stretch them. And honestly, I'll probably just leave it there because if I turn a fan on in this room, because they're paper, they'll blow around, and so that'll really help hold them in place, hopefully.
And now the part that you're probably all waiting for. Did this actually work? Was it worth it? And have I noticed a difference in the garage since I installed it? And what did all this stuff cost? Well, in terms of it actually working, the answer is a resounding yes. It has worked really well, and I have noticed a difference at the temperature being much more controlled in the garage since I installed it. I've also noticed that the garage door is quite a bit quieter as well. It was already pretty quiet because of the wall mount garage door opener that we have, but I've noticed that just the insulation being installed on the door has taken away some of the normal squeaks and creaks that you would expect from a metal garage door opening and closing. Before getting started, I put an Ecobee thermostat sensor in my garage. I detached it from being used in any comfort settings so that it wouldn't affect how my thermostat functions inside, but just to strictly record the temperature, because Ecobee has a really great online portal that keeps up to 15 months of history. So I put this in a few months before I started the insulation project, so I was able to get kind of a baseline for what temperatures do in the garage. And pretty much what I would see is the temperature would be about 10 degrees warmer during the late evenings on a summer day than it was actually outside. So for example, if it was 95 degrees outside, then the garage would maintain about 95 throughout the day, but then in the evening, as the sun began to bake on the door, the temperatures would drop outside, but the temperature would go up in the garage, and I would see about 10 degrees warmer, so 105 in the garage. After I installed the insulation, I saw that the temperature was able pretty much to stay constant with the temperature outside. So if it was 92 degrees outside, then it would be about 92 degrees in the garage. And then in the evening, as the sun began to bake on the door, the temperature would stay steady at that 92 and maintain the same temperature as outside. So I definitely saw a 10 degrees temperature delta
in the garage after installing this insulation. The results honestly aren't quite as impressive as I'd hoped to see, but do keep in mind that I have a freezer and 2 separate garage fridges in my garage, which are generating heat as well. So that adds to the equation, just something to keep in mind that may not be applicable in your situation. Another unexpected consequence is the heat that makes it inside the garage during the summer months stays inside of the garage because of the insulated garage door. So the heat baking on the door shines down on the concrete, and the concrete kind of acts like a pizza stone that you would put in your oven that would retain that heat. And so going into the evening, the temperatures would drop down into the 70s during the summer months, but my garage pretty much never drops below 80 during the summer. And that was an issue we saw some before the insulated doors as well, just because that concrete really heats up and acts as a pizza stone, and just the heat goes directly under the door into the concrete floor and warms up the room that way. I'm not sure there's much I can do about that, but just something to keep in mind. As I said before, I was mainly focused on the hot North Carolina summers, and that's why I did this project. But I've been pleasantly surprised with how well this works during the winter as well. I'm shooting this follow-up video a couple of years after installing this, and it's currently January and it's 26 degrees outside, but yet the temperature in my garage is 56 to 57. So it's been really nice for the winter months as well that this insulation really keeps the freezing cold temperatures out and makes the garage more bearable, especially since we have some workout equipment here and you want to be able to come out in the early mornings and work out. You don't want it to be 20 or 30 degrees like it is outside. So that's been a really pleasant surprise with installing this insulation as well. Tends to do better, it seems, again, keeping in mind that I have appliances in the garage generating heat too. As for the cost, we purchased all this stuff from Home Depot, and it was during 2023 when we purchased it. The price was roughly $350, the largest expense being the polyiso insulation. So we bought 7 sheets at roughly $20 a sheet, and the pink XPS insulation, foil tape, window tint, and construction adhesive, that all adds up as well. But the largest cost was the polyiso, coming in at $20 a sheet. Again, back in 2023 at Home Depot when we purchased this. Another thing you're probably going to have to do is have your spring adjusted, or at least something to consider. The spring at the top of your garage door counterbalances the weight of the door. Remember how when I took off all these horizontal wind braces and the door flew up because it didn't have so much weight on it anymore? Well, now you're adding a lot of weight to the door because of the insulation. I have found that the polyiso is so light that it really doesn't add that much weight. But if you're already at a point where you should consider getting your spring adjusted anyway, like we had recently built the house, and so the garage door had kind of gone through a break-in period, and it was time to have the spring adjusted anyway. So we ended up calling out a garage door company, and they came out and looked at it, and the first thing the guy told me was, oh, we're gonna have to put a brand new spring in. Whenever we insulate garage doors, we have to put in a brand new spring to account for all of that weight. Well, after he gave it a couple of turns, he was really surprised with how little weight that it had added to the door, and actually just the normal adjustment from the break-in period would have required a couple of turns anyway. He only ended up having to do several turns on the spring, and then it was adjusted and able to account for the weight just fine. That was on the double door. On the single door, it took even less because there's less weight there. Now, adjusting a spring on the garage door is something I would never attempt to do myself. It's super dangerous if you don't have experience doing that and don't have the tools to do that. So I don't recommend you doing that yourself. Definitely get a professional to do that, because that spring is under a lot of tension, and if it slips, it could be extremely dangerous. But just know that that's something you may want to consider because of the extra weight that it's adding to the doors. If yours is already pretty balanced before you get started, then maybe you're okay, because again, the polyiso is really light, and it was a pleasant surprise to hear the garage door installation company that came out and adjusted my springs to say that he was really surprised with how little adjustment he had to do, and he was really surprised with how lightweight the material was compared to what they typically install. In summary, we've been very pleased with the results of this project. It's been really great at keeping the North Carolina hot summer heat out of our garage, and then also keeping the heat in during the winter months and keeping that cold freezing temperatures out. We use our garage as a workout gym, and then also we have some overflow food storage from our pantry out here as well, and so having regulated temperatures is really important for both of those, and we've been really happy with the results. If you've enjoyed this as taught by YouTube series, then leave a comment letting me know such, and I'll consider doing more of these in the future. I really enjoyed putting it together, and I hope that the content has been helpful for you if you consider doing a garage insulation project like this yourself. If this video has been helpful for you, I'd appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching.